Egypt's new ambassador to Israel, Salem formally assumed his post on Wednesday, saying the new government remains committed to peace with Israel. Presenting his credentials to Israeli President Shimon Peres, Ambassador reiterated that Egypt is committed to all the agreements and the peace treaty it signed with Israel. Salem assured his Israeli host that the Egyptian government agreed with his vision of a peaceful future for the young generation. He pledged, "We are in the same boat, thinking the same way, and Egypt's new constitution is going to preserve the idea of a moderate and civilian state in Egypt." Addressing Salem, Peres said Israel considered Egypt the leading country of the Arab world. Peres went on to stress the importance of the 1979 peace treaty and expressed his wish to introduce a tone of friendship instead of a sense of suspicion to the bilateral relations. Salem has previously served as Egypt's consul general in Eilat and is considered by foreign ministry officials as someone who knows Israel well. There having been an Egyptian ambassador in Israel since August 2011, when Cairo recalled Yasser Rida from Tel Aviv to protest the deaths of 6 Egyptian servicemen who were killed during a terrorist infiltration from Sinai. Earlier in July, Peres' office said it had received a friendly letter from Morsi in which the Egyptian leader said his country was committed to regional security and stability, including for the Israeli people. After Israeli media reported on the missive, a spokesman for Morsi denied any correspondence had been sent to Peres. Israel's ambassador to Egypt, Yaakov Amitai, was received by Field Marshal Mohammed Hussein Tantawi in February, with both sides reiterating the importance of the peace agreement and cooperation for Egypt and Israel. Meanwhile, Jordan's new ambassador to Israel, Walid Obaidat, officially took up his post, which had been vacant for 2 years despite diplomatic relations between the countries since 1994. Egypt and Jordan are the only 2 Arab countries to have peace treaties with Israel. The agreements are widely unpopular in both Arab countries because of Israel's policy towards the Palestinians. Israel and Egypt signed a historic peace agreement in 1979 that has since been the bedrock of relations between the countries, but ties have grown tense since President Hosni Mubarak was ousted in a popular uprising last year and Mohammed Morsi was elected his successor in June. Morsi, who hails from the fundamentalist Muslim Brotherhood, has been cooler toward Israel than Mubarak's autocratic regime was. But the Brotherhood repeatedly has said it will abide by the peace accord, but has called for changes in the limits on troop numbers in the Sinai Peninsula, saying they impinge on Egyptian sovereignty. The 2 sides' ties have been further strained by the deteriorating security situation in Sinai, where there have been a sharp increase in militant attacks on targets both in Egypt and across the border in Israel. Israel has allowed Egypt to temporarily strengthen its forces in the Sinai Peninsula to fight militants, but has opposed formalizing any changes to the treaty. Tensions were further exacerbated last year when protesters ransacked offices of the Israeli embassy in Cairo, dumping Hebrew language documents out of a window and trapping 6 Israeli staff inside for several hours. The protests were in response to the killing of the 6 Egyptian police officers near the border by Israeli forces. Another complication came last week when the Muslim Brotherhood Supreme Leader Mohammed Badia called on Muslims worldwide to defend Jerusalem, saying Zionists only know the way of force. He said Jews were spreading corruption and had slaughtered Muslims and desecrated holy sites. Egypt and Israel are coordinating on Cairo's biggest security sweep in decades against militants in Sinai, in which 32 people have been killed. Israeli officials have privately voiced concern about the heavy military equipment being sent to Sinai, which is subject to restrictions on the deployment of weapons under the 1979 peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. The 2 sides share security concerns about their volatile border area and both control entry and exit points for the Gaza Strip. Welcome back, and the relations between Egypt and Israel, and we have with us for discussion Ambassador Mohammed Anis Salem, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. We thank you very much for being with us.
Good to be here.
We start with the new relations after the assumption of President Mohammed Morsi to office. A rise of an Islamist, or has an Islamist strong
background, and how would this reflect on Egypt's ties with Israel?
Well, I mean, what you see is a new president who has made it very clear during his campaign that he would respect Egypt's international obligations, international agreements. And in fact, any government in a succession process is obliged by international law to do that. So I think what you're seeing is the kind of acclimatization between a party that was out of politics, that needs to learn the ropes of international relations, the kind of commitments, the kind of systems that are exercised in the world of diplomacy, but also needs to become much clearer on its foreign policy. I think there is an issue here beyond the appearances, beyond the discussion on what kind of letter was sent and what kind of pleasantries were exchanged. I think you need to focus on some of the policy issues that both sides, not only Egypt, Israel also is facing some policy issues here, and they're pretty serious ones.
Yes, very serious ones those days. Returning back to the Egyptian-Israeli ties, and we know that a new ambassador has presented already his credentials to President Shimon Peres, the Israeli president, and with a message of peace, and that Egypt is committed to its peace treaty, as you said, sir. How did you view this matter? I mean, yes, Egypt is committed to the peace treaty. Yes, Egypt is committed to its international agreements, but the in the whole region was a matter of, I don't know whether Israel is it pleased with this, or is it angry with that, or exactly how would Israel cope with that, and how will it transmit that into its own actions, upcoming actions, I mean?
On both sides of a relationship like this, you're going to see dynamics with various political groups. Israel also has some pretty extreme groups in its in its formula of governance, in its cabinet. In fact, many countries in the world have a major problem with the current Israeli foreign minister. Some of his statements obviously seem to be as extreme as they come. On our side, democracy brings in it also new mechanisms. There are parties that are looking to their internal support base. They are constrained by public opinion. Their experience in political life is very short. So there is a dynamic internally that is affecting the relationship. Now, on the legal framework side, the peace treaty is very clear. It obligates both sides to end the state of war, to create a normal relationship, engage in a peaceful relationship, use peaceful means for the resolution of any problems, and establish diplomatic relations. Now, one of the key instruments in this relationship is the exchange of diplomatic relations. I think that the focus on the kind of issues of the diplomatic relationship and the ambassadorship and the letters exchange and so on really distracts us from some of the key issues and some of the key challenges that exist in this relationship. And I think that the political system and the media in Egypt are required to really to move beyond the kind of fixation on these minor issues and look at the core issues that relate to stabilizing the security relationship between both sides, generating or regenerating the dynamic towards a Palestinian peace agreement, establishing a Palestinian state, normalizing the kind of very tense situation that obtains now because of the focus Israel and the United States have on Iranian nuclear capacity, building a nuclear-free zone. These are the big issues, really, the big elephants in the room that we need to deal with.
And that is exactly the core point here. I mean here that Israel now is focused on how will it act towards Iran. And here it wants to know exactly what will be in its back And here comes the point. How will be the relations between Egypt and Israel? How will the Egyptian-Israeli ties be affected if, for an instance, Israel tried to make an aggression towards Gaza once again, if it tried to make an aggression towards Hezbollah in Lebanon, for an instant, what will be the response of Egypt at this?
Well, I mean, what you're looking at is also the ability of the bilateral relationship to preemptively avoid these kind of situations. Now, the bilateral relationship is more than a bilateral relationship. If you look at the key documents, but also the history of the relationship, you will find that there are other parties that are involved in this. The annex to the agreement itself mentions a lot of obligations in terms of maintaining security systems, joint working groups, direct communication on military movements, monitoring mechanisms, multinational force and observers. So there's a whole machinery around this relationship that is designed to keep it stable. Not only that, it's also designed as a model of peacekeeping. And it's a model for other parties. It's a model that could be transferred to a peace agreement related to the Palestinians, a peace agreement for the Golan, a peace agreement. So these mechanisms are not only important in the bilateral relationship, they go beyond that. Now there's also the guarantee role of the United States. When the agreement was signed in '79, on the same day, the United States exchanged a memorandum of understanding with Israel, really, which was refused by Egypt at the time. But that memorandum remains an international document, and it's an ongoing agreement, a very clear political agreement, where the United States has a role in coming on the side of a party that suffers from violation in this agreement. So it commits the United States to playing a more active role in guaranteeing the agreement. So there are a lot of machineries that and it's a complex issue that needs to be looked at carefully, and I think the emotional charge in this needs to be reduced.
Yes, and you've raised a very important issue, which is the U.S. role. And I just want to ask here, did the U.S. play a fair up till this minute towards both sides?
The U.S. is a major power in the region. It won't go away because we blow it away. It's going to be there for many years to come. And as such, it has huge interests in the region. And some of the interests relate to Israel and stabilizing the Egyptian-Israeli relationship. Other issues relate to things like the flow of oil to the Western Hemisphere, the level of nuclearization in that region, and of course the agenda has developed now with the issue of terrorism. So in that context, the U.S. is dealing with several levels of action. It wants to stabilize the relationship. The U.S. has played a very important role in brokering this peace agreement. It also has tried, maybe one would say it hasn't tried hard enough, but the history shows that it's the party that tried more than anybody else on brokering an agreement on the Palestinians. Now, because of the structure of the relationship, that American role has to continue. And one of the challenges for not only for Egyptian diplomacy, but for Egyptian public opinion is to understand how to deal with this. It won't work if we start saying, look, they're not fair, and the victim mentality has to stop. We can't keep saying this party is not fair. The U.S. is looking at this purely from a point of view of their national interests. And we have to deal with it at that level. We cannot deal with it as if somebody is coming from outer space to solve our problems. So I think there's some stock taking that needs to happen on our side also.
What could be those actions from our sides?
Well, one thing is to be very clear about the dynamic we want to create in this region. What is our vision for peace? One of the things that Sadat did was that he came forward with a very imaginative concept of peace, and he drove it himself. He involved the United States. He got the U.S. in as an actor. This was not a choice by the United States to...
And it was not a choice by Egypt as well.
No, it was a choice by Sadat. Sadat was the president of Egypt.
Yes, he was.
And he launched a peace initiative, which comes in the context of a very long effort to reach a peace agreement, which started after '67. Because Egypt went to the Security Council, obtained Resolution 242, accepted the Rogers Agreement before the '73 war, was in negotiations. Now the documents are out. We know the negotiations that took place with Kissinger in Paris, where Egypt proposed the outline of a peace agreement, and Golda Meir subverted it. So this is a complex issue, and I really... I will never get tired of saying you have to look at it in a very cool, rational, long-term manner, because we have had a lot of lessons. This is a 100-year conflict. It started in the late 19th century. There have been immense failures, and the Arabs have paid the price of the mismanagement of this conflict. And it's basically because at certain stages, agreements that were proposed to the Arab side were refused. The Arab side has miscalculated its military strength time and time again, 3-4 times in the history of this conflict, and many opportunities have been lost. And now that horizon needs to change. You need to think more in terms of how will this region transform itself into a region that is providing justice for the Palestinians, peace for all the countries in the region, and opportunities for development, because nobody is going towards huge investments in military as this region is doing.
Yes. From your point of view, returning back to the Egyptian-Israeli ties in particular, and how do you view the role played by the revolution in modeling the Egyptian-Israeli ties?
Well, the revolution in Egypt was basically looking at the internal issues inside the country, the way the governance of Egypt was managed, issues of participation, transparency, human development, justice, that package. One of the spin-offs of the revolution and the loss of control was that we had a series of crises in our foreign affairs related to attacks on embassies in Cairo. We had, if you look at the history of the past 18 months, you'll see that there was an attack on the Israeli embassy, followed by an attack on the Saudi embassy, followed by an attack on a U.S. embassy. Now, that obviously it has represented a problem, that with public opinion engaged so powerfully and the security apparatus not able to control the situation, you have these kind of crisis situations that don't help you conduct a more strategic kind of relationship with the key parties. And look at those three parties. When you look at them, they're very vital parties, the ones where you have the crisis. You don't have a crisis with Central African Republic or Chad or something. You had a crisis with three strategic important partners. So this is something that needs to be looked at and see how you can transform your relationship into a strategic long-term relationship where you focus on your objectives and you create zones of agreement and zones where you need to work on, and that's the elements of these are the elements of diplomacy.
From your point of view, what would be your expectations to upcoming relations between both countries in light of all circumstances that is going on in the region? Because we cannot just put ourselves aside from what is happening in the whole region.
I think both parties are very interested in maintaining the peace agreement. You can see that the dynamics for maintaining the peace agreement with all of its apparatus, the joint military communication system, the MFO, the demilitarized or limited armament zones. So all of this system, I think both parties are interested in. I see problems because of the situation in Sinai. Clearly, a big landmine ahead of us. I see problems because there isn't enough clarity in developing a strategy for relationships with Israel. So you have the possibility of being dragged into crisis after crisis, as opposed to driving the relationship yourself. Now, I don't see a lot of prospects on the Palestinian issue. Much of this is related, of course, to what happens in Washington on the 6th of November. We have a debate after a few hours already, so that will give you a little bit of an insight into the ideas.
Yes, and I don't know what will happen in this debate, but hopefully.
Yes. But I mean, it will be interesting to see the kind of the distance that separates.
It's going to be about the foreign policy, so at least we will have an idea about America's upcoming foreign policy towards the
and the U.S. remains a key party to this. Now, if we get a new level of enthusiasm in the United States, it hasn't come across, and I don't see the driving force inside the region. We don't have any Sadats around who are going to initiate something new, and I don't see a dynamic coming from the region to move to push. So the Palestinian cause, in the absence of a strong American initiative, could be heading towards a very difficult time.
I guess the whole region is going to have difficult times. Hopefully not. That's
good to be prepared.
Good to be prepared, exactly. Ambassador Mohammed Anis, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs, we thank you very much again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And dear viewers, many thanks for watching, and good night.